Hi, this is Downtown, and you're watching a new YouTube series called Fearless Conversations. This is all about conversations that are shaping our culture and impacting you. In each episode, we're going to have fearless conversations about politics, news, hot topics, family, and career, and equipping and inspiring you to have your own fearless conversations. But first, I'm so excited to introduce you to my co-host. To my right, we have the amazing Jade Lotso. She is a powerhouse music artist, wife, mom, and thought leader. So excited. Thank you so much for being a part of the program.
It's such an honor to be here, Dawn. I admire your courage in this hour and your voice. It's this fearless conversation I feel is a timely thing, and I just see so much blessing and life coming from it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And to my left, we have Rochelle Ragusi. She is an amazing wife and mom, educator, powerhouse thought leader. Thank you so much for being a part of the program, Rochelle. So excited for all that you're going to bring and your wisdom and insight.
I'm excited.
And as I said, my name is Downtown. I am a wife, mom, speaker, and author, realtor. Just excited to have these fearless conversations where we really just talk about these issues that are impacting you, impacting culture, and what we can do in today's day and hour, because I feel like you can feel intimidated to have fearless conversations. So as you ladies know, right now, people are afraid to have fearless conversations, stating their opinion on what they think, what they believe, because there's just you just see that there's one side of the issue that's getting a lot of attention, and so it's more important now than ever to have these fearless conversations. And I don't know about you, but part of what started stirring in me to have something like this is seeing when people do share their opinion and share their viewpoint, if it's not the popular one or the one that is celebrated in media, those people go under attack. I mean, they're worried about being doxxed, they're worried about character attacks, they're worried about being misinterpreted and misunderstood, and just basically, in some cases, their careers being over. And so I think more than ever, we need to have more conversation, not less conversation, so that we can really make an impact in culture to say, no, there isn't voices that need to be silenced. Like, we all belong at the table, all the voices belong at the table, and everybody should have a right to speak about what they think about particular issues without this fear of being destroyed. And we've seen it in media, and I think the more we stay silent, we're going to see it come closer and closer to home, and I just don't want to see that, because that's not the world that we want to hand our children, one where you can be your life can be over just because you shared an opinion that was unpopular or a viewpoint that just wasn't the one that everybody was celebrating at the moment. So curious to hear what you ladies think about that real fear that's surrounding being fearless in this time and sharing your voice.
Mm-hmm. And I think that that's so true, because I just feel like conservatives and Republicans have just been silent for so long. It's almost like they took this position to kind of keep the peace. And I think that what really has happened is just this false illusion of peace, and it's not certainly not the peace of the Bible that the Bible talks about. And in doing this, we haven't accomplished what we needed to accomplish, because our opposing voices are getting so much louder while our voices are just getting so much softer and quieter. And some people are just bowing out, because it's true. You give somebody a voice for so long and they're able to be so loud, and you just don't say anything. I mean, eventually, the people that need to hear this message, they're not hearing it. They're hearing one thing. And then we have people coming up and they're saying, how can so many people get it so wrong? And it's because they're only hearing one side. Mm-hmm. And you see it all the time. You talked about the media, the education system, Hollywood. It's one main voice, and the other voices, you get called like a conspiracy theorist, and so I think that we do need to have enough people standing up and saying, in the appropriate way, because there is a time to be quiet, there's a time to speak, and there's a time to be bold. And I think that if we can just have enough people to have courage to speak up and say, just because I don't agree with you doesn't mean that I'm a racist, a sexist, a bigot, all these labels that you get. Because, I mean, it's extremely unfair that we hear one side of the conversation, and the other side, it's like, well, we just moved from Grinnell. And my husband had customers that would come in, and they're like secret Republicans. They can't, Grinnell's very liberal, and so you have to be if you're a Republican, you just don't say anything unless you kind of find these other ties, and it's like, we have to talk in private, and I don't want them to hear because I don't want them to think less of me. And so I just think we need to be courageous enough to speak up so that other people can have a voice as well.
I love that. And, and you're right about times and seasons. And I think it's important for us to know what time and season we're in right now. But I feel like we're at a moment, it's like, what is our country, what is the foundation of our country? And, it's almost like a battle of the kingdoms. Is this God's country, And I feel like this holy indignation, like, I just feel like it rising. But the good thing about that is like this, like God, like he's love. So I see it as a moment for the church, so the fruit of the church to really be seen. It's not hid behind religion or anything like that, but the core value of this republic had to be freedom, because true worship requires freedom. And I just think of what's attacked right now. It's freedom. Freedom. Like someone along the lines felt threatened, or thought that there's a better way. But this is the core value of our nation, and I believe it's worth fighting for.
The other thing I wanted to touch on before we move on is just the importance of being awakened in this season, because I think, it's so easy to just go about life and, unless you're really tuned into what's going on in the news and in the bigger picture, it's just easy to kind of get lost in your own bubble and what's going on. And the reason why I think it's important, I think maybe as we were growing up, we didn't have to be our parents maybe didn't necessarily have to be hyper aware of what was going on politically speaking and culturally speaking. But now more than ever, I feel like you can't not be awakened and aware, just because there's just so much going on, and there's so much terminology thrown around and verbiage that unless you do the research, you might not even know, number one, what that term is, or two, how it's impacting big tech and corporations and just the world in general. I know we're going to talk a little bit later on terms like critical theory, but there's other terms now that they've become mainstream verbiage, but we can kind of tune it out if we're not really awakened and paying attention to what these terms are that are being used to shape organizations and, big tech and media and all of that. So I don't know what you ladies think on that, but I just think being awake is just almost a requirement at this point.
Well, and I think that there's so much that you hear so many people say, I don't do politics, I don't want anything to do with that, and they just they bow out. I think it's just so overwhelming, and you don't always know where to start. And I think if you just look at the big picture, you're like, I just can't, it's too much. And so if you could get to a place where, you just take a little bit at a time, you hear something and then you go and you check up on it, like, is this really accurate? What does this mean? Like, where do I actually stand on this? Not where do people tell me I should stand, but just take it little by little and just kind of digest what you take in. You don't have to know everything right away. I feel like even us just sitting here, I don't know everything. And I'm just trying to learn as I go. And I think that that's really beneficial for people that just feel extremely overwhelmed, because like you said, it's so important and necessary to be involved and to be aware of what's going on. And I just think too, if we could just be encouraging to people to just take it a little at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself. Nobody expects you to know everything. And I think that's
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you even mentioned that, because I was pondering the different terms used, which is interesting, because in an article and if you will, left wing, like the word they're using is woke. Woke. And then the word, I guess you could say God's people is using in what's to come is an awakening. So what's really interesting to me is I think we need to, it's so important for us to know our foundation and what's worth fighting for. But even this, because the enemy likes to do counterfeits, because God's heart is for an awakening now. So it's just interesting that they're, the terms that are being used. But what I think is important for us to grasp is we have the power to back our beliefs behind the words we're using, and foundationally we have a strong footing, because God's intentions for this nation is good.
Yes.
And I really believe with all my heart that this nation, even as people early on, and some of the first people that came, and the prophecies that were released, and there was a group of, was it Puritans or Pilgrims, when they came, like, it was a long journey, and they went through the storms, and they hadn't eaten and weeks, and it was just an intense journey. But when they got to the land, they didn't even get off the boat. And I just share the story because I think it shows the reverence they had for God. They didn't get on the shores. He said, we need to fast and pray for 3 days before they even got off on land. And then they declared, from this, I'm not sure if it was that group, but just the fruit to come from like that. And when I say this reverence, like there is a holy thing, like when people came, there's so much people who came here to get away from religious persecution, to come and to really have true freedom. And I just think of like one of the proclamations made as a flat, as I kind of stood there staking this ground, was that this land would, that the gospel of the kingdom would go forth in this land, and not just this land, but to the nations. So I think there's like literally a God call on this nation, and I think that's kind of, we're right in the midst of 2020. Like I think of like the vision, like at the beginning of the year, you heard a lot of people say 2020 vision, and then people kind of got knocked off their horse because of this, what this year has brought. But when what we're about to see, I truly believe is like there's an exposing. So we are going to have 2020 vision, and with that, we can unify under, the firm foundation under something that we can literally begin to build from. That won't be shaken.
Yeah, and I love the point you brought out about being woke versus awakened. Like I hadn't even put those two things together. That's really powerful insight to think of. Woke versus awakened and the counterfeit. And then two, what you said about how can you applicably start to absorb and process all this information, because it can feel really overwhelming. And you can, we're not an expert, none of us here are experts on any particular topic per se, but I think it's just that intention to just take those steps to start to become more aware, and like how you so nicely put it, just bite-sized things, just like one step at a time, just something to build off of and build from. I think that's so powerful and important. The other thing I kind of wanted to get into was big tech censorship. So most of us, anyone watching, would have seen all of the users and articles that came out about when they would try to share something, and it would either have a disclaimer underneath of it, or it would have just saying that you can't view this because it's deemed fraudulent, or I'm trying to think of the other terms that they use. It's deemed inaccurate, whatever the case may be. There was just so much news that came out about the censorship for just different stories leading up to the election, and about the virus, and now about the vaccine. There was just some releases recently where Facebook has announced they're going to censor some COVID misinformation. And so I think there is such a need for some healthy conversation around what is appropriate censorship, what is overreach, and really kind of diving into what is the motive behind some of this censorship. Because I think if you were to just go about your life and not pay attention, it's, again, we just can't live in a time where we're not questioning some of these things, because, we're living in such an unparalleled time where never before has information come from, it used to be, our parents, they would sit down and watch the 5 o'clock local news, and then the national news would come on. I remember my dad always watching the news. He was very adamant about that. But now our news is coming, on our phones, or looking at it online on social media, and just on the internet. And there are these organizations that have arisen and, provided a lot of good and the ability for us to connect. But at the same time, there's been a catch-22, and there's just been another side to this of they're so powerful and now they're censoring. And I think, it would be foolish not to really dive a little bit deeper and look into, number one, what's the agenda and the motive for why they're hiding and censoring voices, and two, what are their rights? Like, should they have the right to do that? Of course, I'm thinking there needs to be more dialogue, not less dialogue. And when you're trying to censor one voice, I feel like there's a reason. And of course, I'm sure they're going to have their arguments for why they feel like they should be censoring voices. But I think given the fact that these platforms have so many users, I mean, everybody and their mother has a Facebook. Even I remember it was kind of a thing when even grandparents got Facebook, because you're like, oh, wow, even grandma has Facebook. But really, this is, very few people now don't have some sort of social media that they tune into. So just really kind of wanting to dive into your thoughts on really the importance of really questioning why these stories are being censored and why voices are being censored.
Well, and it's the same thing, like if you look at CNN, even, if we're going back, to people maybe older than grandma that are still watching CNN, or they're playing it in the airport or in the nursing homes, it's on. They're putting out just what they want you to hear. And they're just giving very little time to the things that don't benefit their agenda. And you look at the Hunter Biden story, and Twitter was, flagging those and taking them down and saying, this isn't, we can't verify this, so it's really not fair. Well, then they come out with this article about Ivanka Trump, and from, what was she, in high school, and they said, oh, when she was this sassy high schooler, she blamed her fart on somebody else. Like, how do you verify that? But there's actual videos. Have you guys heard about that?
No.
Why is this such a major story, but what Hunter Biden is doing is not?
Yeah.
Like, how do you verify that, but not this? And there's actual, video footage of Hunter Biden doing some very questionable things that were, arose from his laptop. And I highly doubt there's any video footage of Ivanka Trump, doing what they're saying. And why is that news? And I think they're gearing this towards, people, they're painting her in a certain light, and they know that they're doing it, and they're trying to cover up things that they don't want people to see. And that's really what censorship is. And you even look back to, PragerU has had this lawsuit with YouTube for how long now, where they're flagging their videos. And so if you have the restricted mode on YouTube, like they do in schools, well, you can't access PragerU videos. And so students, if they're doing research or doing projects over something like climate change or, just the broad range of videos that PragerU puts out, they don't have that option. And so they know what they're doing, and we know what they're doing. But they do also, it's like they do it in such a way that if you say something about it, oh, you're just into these conspiracies. And I think it goes back to the first point, where we just need more people speaking up and saying this is really unfair. President Trump, he even tweeted out when his son, Donald Trump Jr. had COVID, he tested positive for COVID, he kind of put out this announcement like, Donald Trump Jr. is doing really well. Thank you for asking. And then they even Facebook tagged right at the bottom of that post, Joe Biden is a projected winner of the 2020 election. Like, what does that have to do with his son having COVID?
Right.
Everything. Yeah.
So, they know what they're putting out there, and they are strategic about it. I think when we look at the hearings that they've had, they kind of act like, well, this wasn't really intended. They know what they're doing.
Right. And I think it's important to kind of be looking at motives right now. Like, if is there any way to argue, like, even hearing what you said about the Ivanka thing and then the Hunter Biden, like it's so clear to see the double standard, and just like, and let's all just step back and really ask ourselves, like, is this right? Like, it's not right. And so I think it's really important where we're getting our information right now, because there is such a unhealthy hatred, unhealthy swing of things, like just what, like the amount, what 90% of mainstream media, is that the number? It's completely filtrated, and like they've made up their mind. It's like they have a mission, they have an agenda. It's not, that's not free press. And so, speaking of finding good sources, like I've been like, Rick Joyner has these heritage briefs, and there's 45 of them, and they're short. But I'm telling you, I feel like it's awakening such a passion in me, like, because it's giving like information about like the founding fathers, but just building on it, and just like there's such a thing, and it's just really come alive to me. But I just wanted to reference that because I'm sharing little glitch, like certain things that stir. So even as you're talking about this, the founders, this stuck out, like, and for me, it puts things in context when I kind of see big picture, like what is going on here. The founders were resolute that religious freedom was the foundation for all true liberty, and why religious freedom had to include the freedom to not be religious as well. And it was upon this foundational belief that freedom of speech, the press, and etc. were solidly moored. So it's interesting to me to think like the basis of free press is, and I love that. I love that because like what's the difference here? Like freedom is so precious. And I think like, if that's like my prayer, even through all this, is like that we would be awakened, like all of us, like freedom is such a gift, such a gift. And you know, I mean, it's just the way God operates. He doesn't force us to love him. Like, there's 2 trees in the garden. We have a choice. And you can't, like, we're not robots. We're not, like, micromanaged. And, you know, if we could kind of go back to the counterfeit thing, I even think about, like, why, like, people want control. And I think, you know, and my heart kind of moves for compassion to these people, because they think, like, people, they're going to make it all right. Like, maybe some of these people aren't thinking, like, God, oh, whatever, God. You know, it's, and they're doing everything they can. But the sad thing is when it's all said and done, like if you go back and really study history and tyranny and any of these things, like, they come out with good intentions, but it always ends horribly. Do you guys have more?
And I think that, is it Walter Williams used to say, well, he just passed away recently, but he would say, you have to stop looking at the intention behind it and start looking at the outcomes. I mean, intentions are important and they can be everything, but just because you have good intentions doesn't mean that you're going to get to point B, you know, just based on good intentions. You have to start looking at the outcomes of these things. And I think when we look back in history, there are things that sounded really good in the moment, and the people who implemented them thought that they were going to be really good, but they weren't. And so we keep trying to sell these things that just do not work. And, you know, it's just, you know, we talked about before how, yeah, it sounds really good for everyone to have equal outcomes. Doesn't that sound nice? But that's just not possible. And even when you look in scripture, when you think about heaven is not socialist. Not everybody is on an equal level there in heaven. You are responsible and you are accountable for what you've been given. So you answer for what you've been given. Don't worry about what everybody else has over here and what they're doing. You are responsible for what you've been given, and you will give an account for that. And we will not all have the same account to give, and there's just no way to achieve that. And I think that, as good as it sounds, it's just not possible. It's just not possible, and it's not biblical, and it's almost, even if you think about it, you know, you think about the intentions of it, but it's also selfish in many ways. I don't need to be looking around at what everybody else has and say, I need to be on their level because that's what, I just want that for myself. I don't know what they went through to get to that place. And I need to worry about what I've been called to do and what I've been given. That's what I need to worry about. And I think that,
that's a great point.
Yeah.
Too, the other thing that kind of came to mind as you were talking is when you had mentioned that these things started off with good intentions, but you also have to pay attention to the result. I think there's just so much division right now where you see somebody on the other side and, you know, you just automatically assume a lot of things about them. And, you know, I think you can find it on both sides. I mean, of course, I think a lot of what we see is, because the media is so left-driven, you do see it at least magnified on the left in that sense. But I think it's just getting back to a place where we aren't attacking each other's character because we don't agree. And it would be nice to get back to a place where we can look at somebody who has an opposing viewpoint and not just automatically assume that they had bad intentions. You might not agree with their end point or the goal that they're trying to go for. You might not agree with how, you know, the process of it and their thinking on how you make it happen, but at least can we get to the place where we're no longer thinking that the person on the other side is an ugly, horrible person, racist, bigot, homophobe, all of these, you know, horrible terms that are just thrown out just like so easily and so quickly. I really think we need to get back to a place where, you know, we are not always automatically assuming just because someone doesn't believe on the same side as us that they're horrible people. The other thing, I feel like when we see these, you know, when we have these discussions, it's easy to think, okay, well, what's the positive side? What's like the spin on this? And one thing that's come up that I feel like is encouraging as it relates to big tech censorship is seeing platforms like Parler rise up and people that are creating other options for platforms that aren't focused on censoring. And just like you can look back and see that MySpace was a thing and now it's no longer a thing. So platforms can come and go, and you know, Facebook may or may not come and go in that sense, but at least it's nice that there are some options. You know, I don't think that that's always applicable in every aspect of this, you know, because we don't really want to have a segregated society. That's not what we're going for. But I do think it's encouraging that there are other people and other innovators, other people who are, you know, technologically advanced to create these types of platforms where there's just an alternative and an option.
Well, and you even look at, I think instead of just censoring in general, because everybody's always going to say, well, what if they say something offensive? And I don't want to hear that. And that's kind of the big thing about limiting free speech and stuff like that. Well, I want to know what's in your heart. I want to know if you think this or that. I don't want you to say what I want you to say just because that's what I want to hear. I want to know what's in your heart. How are you ever going to reach people if you don't know where their heart is at? And I think when we look at, I think Facebook and Twitter kind of had it right for a while there when you just had the option to, you could hide people or you could block people. Like if this is so offensive, I don't want to see it. Well, I can personally block them. And then other people still have the option. That's their right. I mean, you don't have the right to come into my house and berate me and say all these things about me. I mean, maybe that would happen someday to somebody. But I have the right to tell you to leave. Like, you're blocked from my house. But you can go stand on the street and say it. That's your right. And I think that we need to just kind of get back to that core of, we just need to know our boundaries of when people are, when we are able to just block people, and that's our right, but we don't have the right to tell everybody else what they can and cannot say and what they can and cannot listen to.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just that, and that goes back to free will too, where you talked about. I mean, biblically we have free will. That is what we are supposed to have. And God wants to know our heart. He didn't create us like robots, and so I think that the same should be represented here. We're not robots, and we need to see your heart. I mean, I want you to see my heart. So I think that that's so important as, when we want to tie in free speech to kind of biblical standards. I think that that's really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Another thing that has come to mind, or not really come to mind, but come to the forefront as COVID has happened in 2020 and the government has implemented what they thought was the most effective way to combat it, control it, is most recently at the time of this filming, Thanksgiving was last week. We have seen just so much hypocrisy in the sense of governors and mayors putting out restrictions and regulations that they didn't themselves follow. Mm-hmm. And so what comes to mind is, there is, I think, a concern for government overreach on what they are allowed to restrict us on and limit us on. And I think, I was encouraged by the Supreme Court ruling in New York that overruled Governor Cuomo's restriction that churches couldn't meet. And it's just, it's hard to take sometimes leadership seriously like this when they're telling you one thing. I mean, I have some of them written down, the names of who they were, but really, there's even, since I had gathered this information, there's been even more that's come out. Obviously, Gavin Newsom was a big one that everybody heard about. Sheila Cole, the LA County Supervisor, and there was a mayor in Colorado. I mean, there's just a lot to list at this point. So
many of them. Well, and that's what, again, when you look at, and I try not to draw this hard line where, they're on the left and we're on the right, but I think what's really important, what you really want to look for when you're looking at political leaders, is that they practice what they preach. And so what the left has done in the aspect of COVID, is they've kind of demonized those on the right who are, saying we need to have our freedoms, we need to be respectful of others, but we're not going to limit freedoms in order to overcome this. And so I think that most of the Republican politicians have been consistent in, because Donald Trump got a lot of flack for having these rallies and stuff. Well, no, maybe if in your opinion he was wrong, but at least he's being consistent. He's saying, this is what I believe in, this is what I believe for the American people, and I also operate in that. A lot of the political leaders on the left, what they have done is, I believe this is what's right for the American people, but I'm not going to operate in that. And so, you mentioned a couple, but even like Lori Lightfoot, who went out and got her hair done. And she's like, my hair is important to me. My hygiene is important. Well, yeah, a lot of people take hygiene very important. Does that mean that they shouldn't go to the salon then? Nancy Pelosi at the salon, and supposedly she was tricked. Like that was how do you get tricked into making an appointment to go to a salon when you tell other people you can't go? You weren't tricked. You just weren't following your own rules. And the same with, Lori Lightfoot. And just the restrictions are getting out of control. I shared even the LA mayor, Eric Garcetti, who's banning unnecessary walking, even like you can't just be out walking. How have we come to this?
Wow.
That you can't go walk your dog, or you can't go ride your bicycle. I think Ben Shapiro said, what are you, just riding your bicycle spitting on people? Why can you not take a bike ride?
Yeah.
This is ridiculous. And they're not following these things. And I think, what's that saying where it's like, freedom for me but not for thee? And we're seeing a lot of that, and we're seeing a lot of that hypocrisy. And I think they were too quick to demonize people on the right for wanting to operate in their freedoms. They expect this of the people. The little people have to follow these rules, but they do not. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's been very transparent. We can see that very clearly just in so many, high up left politicians.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, totally. And I even think of, like, just this theme, like, we the people is really arising, because you see that, like, that's so dangerous. It's like the imbalance there of what, put all these restrictions, and, like, for, like, sometimes, I mean, we the people maybe don't know all the planning behind it, or maybe they're not, maybe some people that are doing it aren't even aware, and they think it's like, this is what we're doing. But we have to be aware, I think, of what's at stake. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, we're trying to do what's best here, but we have to, like, go back again, big picture, like, what's going on, even with COVID, and everything, like, COVID, like, it's not, like, is COVID real? Yes, it's happening. It's, like, it's bad, it's horrible what's happening, but, like, and I even heard it said, too, the solution can't be worse than the problem.
Yeah.
And you have to really, and that's not belittling the people who have really, like, lost their life to it.
Yeah. It's
not belittling that. It's going back, like, looking with wisdom. And I think it is important, like, I know we work out our own salvation, and there's thing about taking ownership, but also looking, like, it's not like we're necessarily judging other people, but we have to, like, I love what you mentioned about the heart, because if we the people elect our elected officials, and it's important that they're not just saying words, and then they can't back it up. I mean, a tree is known by its fruit, and I mean, Jesus even tells us, like, what is a thistle bush going to give you a grape or a fig, or, the opposite? Like, so it's like, when we see these things, we do need to take them to heart. And when I think about, like, just to be encouraged, because sometimes like, a picture of what's going on now, when you're facing a Goliath, and even half the Israel army believe, this giant standing there, and you're hearing for 40 days, he's demanding what he's going to do, and half of, actually most of the Israel were believing him. They're like, who's going to face this giant? And then David comes out. But I think that's a picture almost what's like what's going on right now. Like, we can't give into fear. We like David just knew, like, our perspective is so important right now. Like, who are we listening to? Who are we listening to? If search for yourself, if you don't believe us, like, if 90% of if they have, like, what is the reasoning? Like, what is, like, let's study. We have to think for ourselves. And even looking in history, like, you can compare it to, like, shifting out, like, when you go to search for gold and you use that little, in the water and the sand, the different things find through, but the gold will stay in there. Like, we need to shift through, and we need the sand to fall, and we need to see what is the gold that we can hold on to. And value, gold is valuable, and so we are valuing the valuable things.
Yeah, that's such a good point too. And it honestly makes me think of that scripture where it says, I'm probably not going to say the can't say the whole story, but where it was talking about, there's a scripture that says that there's a shaking, and what's meant to stay will stay, and what's meant to fall away will fall away. And I think that's what you have to do when you listen to media and information in some sense. Like, what's the truth? Where's the truth? Where's the gold? What's meant? What is opinion? That can be shaken away per se. But what's the truth? Not that you can't take an opinion. I'm not saying that at all. But like you said, looking for the gold and what you're really hearing too.
Yep.
So, gosh, this next topic is, I feel like, such a one that we're all living in right now. and that is, how do you raise children in a world that's so politically divided? And I this came to the forefront in our home just a couple of weeks ago when my youngest daughter came home and was telling me that her and her friends were talking politics, which sounds crazy, fifth graders, but she was saying that a friend said to her, you know, if you voted for Trump, then I guess we can't be friends anymore. And that floored me, that fifth graders are deciding friendships based on political side. There is something seriously wrong with where we're at if that is where, I mean, if our fifth graders are having to make these decisions and choosing to make these decisions because of what they hear, you know, what they're absorbing, what they're constantly being taught and seeing adults do, and they're modeling that, and that's just disheartening. And then my older daughter, who is in high school, she's a freshman, and she, you know, I asked a friend of hers, if you are on the right and you state your opinion on who you voted for, you know, how is that received? And she said, oh, you'll be called a racist. You'll be called a homophobe, and just the fact that, you know, just as I was saying earlier, we have to be awakened and aware. I feel like so much we have to awaken and aware our children to know what they're facing when they go into school, you know, and the things that they're taught, and they have to know what to decipher. Again, to use your analogy, like what is meant to be shaken off, and or what are they gonna, you know, find the gold in what they're learning, and then the things that are opinion or not our own family belief system can kind of shake away. You know, I think it's so important to, raise children right now who are aware. And, you know, you might have some people say, well, how can you do that? Children should just be allowed to be children. You know, I can see that side of it. But at the same time, they're facing a different world than we faced when we were growing up. And I think it would do our children a disservice to not give them some level of awareness of knowing why we believe what we believe in, which I know that's the passion of your heart, Rochelle, is apologetics and all of that. And I think it's so valuable. I feel like I should even take a class that you teach on apologetics, because I mean, I would like some more foundational information on that as well, with certain things. But when it comes to our children, I just think now more than ever, they have to be awakened and aware, as is appropriate for their age, of course.
Yes. And I think what's really important is when you're looking at the example that you gave when your daughter came home and said, you know, her friend said, if you voted for Trump, we can't be friends. I think that comes from the home. And so what they're hearing at home is, I can't be friends with a Trump supporter. I can't be friends with somebody on the right. And I think what we need to do is we need to be even more diligent with our kids. And I mean, our kids are just bound to hear us talking politics, because Razzie and I, that's what we do. We talk politics, we talk theology, we talk apologetics, and they're just going to hear it. And so I think our tone and how we say things is extremely important, because they need to know you are going to be out in the real world, and you're going to interact with people that do not believe the same thing that you do. And you need to know how to treat them like human beings and how to be respectful. That doesn't mean that you buckle and bow down to their every thought and ideology, or, you know, things like that. You have to be bold in what you believe, but you also have to learn how to coexist with people who don't believe the same thing that you believe. And we're not seeing a lot of that. And so I think it just goes back again to our first topic, where because of that, because of the hostility, so many people on the right are so scared to speak up, because they don't want to be unfriended, or they don't want to lose their job. They don't want to, you know, X, Y, and Z, whatever may come about. And I think what we do at home is we don't shield our kids from things that we disagree with. So I think what's really beneficial for children when they're growing up is that you expose them to things that are outside of your religion and outside of your political beliefs, so that way they have an understanding. Well, why is it that we don't believe this way? Well, I'm not going to just not tell you about it. We're going to talk about it. We're going to point out the holes in this. We're going to get down and we're going to discuss this, so that way we're not just sending our kids out in the world with this closed mind where they've only been exposed to what we believe in, and then they only have those points to argue. They need to know, in order to have meaningful conversations, you need to know what they believe, and it would be beneficial for them to know what you believe. Now, you're not always going to get that, but at least you do your part. You know what they believe, so that way you can have a meaningful conversation with them and address these points. Yeah. And it needs to be thought out. And I think we just see that so hugely right now when we're sending kids off to college, or, you know, even just sending our kids to school. Deja, my oldest, has just faced this so many times where she's had really liberal teachers that'll be pushing these things, and they even do, you know, in her ELP class, they would do political votes and stuff, and divide the classroom up, and it'd always be her and maybe like one or two other students that were voting Republican, and all the rest were, and even the teacher, she would be very vocal about her beliefs and stuff. And I think you also need to teach your child, although this may be comfortable, I still have a voice and I need to use my voice. And so I think we need to be really, really intentional about raising understanding but bold children when it comes to theology and politics.
That's so good. And maybe this topic might be one of the things that bridges the divide. When you think about this, everybody wants to have good families, and we could see kind of the breakdown of the families, But I'm even thinking in this, like, if we can just humble ourselves, because if you think about, like, what's going on in our culture right now, it's embarrassing. Like, do you want your kids to act like that? No. And I think about, like, parenting has been a humbling thing for me, I think, and by God's grace, I can humble myself, because I don't know how many times I have to be like, to realize this isn't just this hierarchy thing. This is about heart connection. And to think about, like, yes, there's order, like, children, obey your parents, because there's a promise with it. It'll go well with you, and you will live a long life. There's a promise there, but if the parent doesn't have God's heart, that's very dangerous. So when I think about even this whole matter is, we are the example. Like, if we're just parents, like, telling our kids what to do, and then I think that one of the most dangerous thing, which I think is too acceptable in our culture right now, is to say, do what I say and not what I do. Ooh, 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 ooh. That your kids will learn what you do.
Well, that goes back to the politicians, even that we talked about, do as I say and not as I do.
Exactly, but taking it back to the family, because we can't control the politician, but if we control and own our home and our voice, and this is what we have to get, guys, as a free people, we'll get, if we go back to the basics and use our voices, the right people will get in. Right now it's crazy what's going on, but if we just take the small thing, if we just take that and own, like you said before, ownership of ourselves, like we have to humble before God, and then I have to deal with myself, and then in my home and my family, and we will see, there's this phrase, I wonder if it's right here, let me see, this is by, let's see if I say her name right, Annis Nin. She said, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. And there is, and then to go along with that phrase, Ray Hughes shared one of my favorite little quotes the other day, and it was, even, this is talking about songwriting, but I think it comes with life, because it says, to write a better song, you need to live better, and you will write better songs. And that basis of our being, we can't forget how important our being is, and the only way our being changes is when we find a loving God. And I think, and just take ownership, and how do you be a good parent? I think you need God's grace to be a good parent, because I don't know about you guys, but how many times, like, it's humbled me in this process, because I want to be an example with all my heart to them. I don't want to just tell them, and so it keeps me more accountable, as a parent. So if we can just step back to those things and see, it's not a curse, that's a blessing to be more accountable, because even if we own that, then our influence in the world is going to be solid and something valuable that people can hold on to.
And I think that's really important to think about, being humble, and we're going to answer for what we do. We're not going to answer for, what the government did for us, so I just think that it just ties back to, if you're going to have strong theology and you're going to tie it to your political views, do it well. And so I think that the Bible talks about accountability and being humble, and that's our job to do. That's not the government's job to do for us. That is our responsibility. And I think we see in society where we're pushing so much on the government, we're expecting them to do this for us, and we're equipped to be able to do this. And so, and that doesn't mean, I don't want to come off as heartless. That doesn't mean that we don't help people in need, because we're also called to do that, but at our free will.
But it's encouraging when you say that. It's empowering. And people need to be empowered. Because what you're saying is, you see all this going on, and so many people are overwhelmed. What do I do? Be empowered, because you can do something.
Yeah, very true. Well, I know there's lots of other topics we can get into, but I think we've probably wrapped up what we should cover in this time frame. So Thank you, ladies, for your input and your insight and wisdom. I think it's so great to hear multiple perspectives on some of these hot topics. And, you know, we can sit there and we can hear news organizations, but I think it's another thing to hear from, you know, people who are walking this out and living this out in the day-to-day. And so I appreciate your wisdom and insight. And so that's it for today's episode of Fearless Conversations.
Awesome. Thanks.